Professor Oded Lifshitz from the Department of Archaeology and Ancient Near Eastern Cultures at Tel Aviv University is inviting you to join him to a journey following those who composed the historical descriptions in the Hebrew Bible.
The Untold Story of the Kingdom of Judah, Part D. The Untold Stories of the Kingdom of Israel. Chapter 6. The untold story about the greatness of the Kingdom of Israel in the days of Omri and Ahab. At the beginning of the 9th century BCE, the Kingdom of Israel first appeared on the stage of history. The archaeological findings and inscriptions found from that period testify to a sharp change in urban culture, administration, economy, and society, suggesting the existence of a mature, large, strong, and wealthy kingdom with substantial standing among the kingdom of the area, which had developed rapidly in the first half of the 9th century BCE. This is exactly the period when, according to both biblical and external sources, the Omride dynasty ruled Israel. According to the first book of Kings, chapter 16, verse 23, in the 31st year of Asa, king of Judah, Omri began to reign over Israel and reigned for 12 years. 6 years he reigned in Tirzah. The years of his reign can be determined to be in 885 to 874 BCE, and the main information about it is given in verse 24. He bought the hill of Samaria, Har Shomron, from Shemer for 2 talents of silver, and he fortified the hill and called the name of the city which he built Samaria, Shomron, after the name of Shemer, the owner of the hill. Omri succeeded by his son Ahab. His reign can be dated to 874 to 853 BCE, and the opening formula about him in first book of Kings 16 verse 29 states, in the 38th year of Asa king of Judah, Ahab the son of Omri began to reign over Israel, and Ahab the son of Omri reigned over Israel in Samaria 22 years. Ahab was succeeded by his son Ahaziah, about whom it is written in the first book of Kings, chapter 22, verse 51. Ahaziah, the son of Ahab, began to reign over Israel in Samaria in the 17th year of Jehoshaphat, king of Judah, and he reigned 2 years over Israel. His reign can be dated to the years 853 to 852 BCE, and after his death, Ahaziah was succeeded by his brother Jehoram, about whom the opening formula in 2nd book of Kings, chapter 3, verse 1 states, in the 18th year of Jehoshaphat, king of Judah, Jehoram, the son of Ahab, became king over Israel in Samaria, and he reigned 12 years. His reign can be dated to the years 852 to 842 BCE, and his assassination symbolizes the end of the Omri dynasty, whose rule over Israel lasted for more than 40 years. What sources of information do we have about the Omride dynasty? Our starting point is the complex that was built in the city of Samaria in the early 9th century BCE, that is, during the reigns of Omri and Ahab. This complex included a podium built on a large retaining walls, which reshaped the natural hill, resulting in a sort of a box-shaped building. At the top of the podium, a complex and elaborate palace was built, which stylized itself architecturally with ashlar stones and decorated stone capitals. The same architectural style was revealed in the former Canaanite centers of the nearby regions, Megiddo and Jezreel in the Jezreel Valley, Chatzor to the north of the Sea of Galilee, Ein Gev to the east, and Gezer in the northern lowlands, which became the southwestern corner of the kingdom of Israel. Moreover, the same architectural style was discovered at two sites located in strategic places in Transjordan, overlooking the main roads that pass through the area. Khirbet el-Mudaini at Temed and Khirbet Atauz, sites that are likely identified with the cities of Yahatz and Atarot, which are mentioned both in the biblical descriptions and in the Mesha Stele. Archaeological finds from the period not only testify to the strengthening of the kingdom of Israel, its development and wealth, but it is consistent with our historical sources, since the first inscription that mentioned the kingdom and kings of Israel by name also belongs to the same period of time, the Stele of Mesha, king of Moab. Shalmaneser III, who ruled between 858 and 824 BCE, king of Assyria, also wrote in one of his inscriptions that Ahab of Israel was one of the three kings who led an alliance of 12 kingdoms against the rising Assyrian Empire, and that he brought 2,000 chariots and 10,000 soldiers to the war coalition against Assyria in the Battle of Karkar in northern Syria in 853 BCE. The same Assyrian king also mentioned Yehu, the son of Omri, in one of his inscriptions. Although Yehu was from a competing dynasty, which led to the destruction of the Omride dynasty, it seems that from the Assyrian perspective, the name of the kingdom remained as the name of the founder of the dynasty they recognized. This definition of Yehu seems to have also given some legitimacy to his rule as far as the Assyrians were concerned. Also in the Black Obelisk from Shalmaneser III time, a portrait of Yehu kneeling before the Assyrian king is presented, and there he is also called the king of the house of Omri. All these sources suggest that it was Ahab, the son of Omri, founder of the dynasty, who turned the kingdom of Israel into a large, strong, and prosperous local power, which continued to exist even during the reigns of kings Jehoram and Ahaziah. What did the Deuteronomistic historiographers know about the history of the kingdom of Israel during the reign of the Omride kings? And from what they knew, what did they tell and what did they choose to omit? As I will show in this chapter, the authors of the historical descriptions in the Book of Kings didn't know much about the ancient and distant period of time. They used all the sources they had at hand, which were few and limited, to create a partial and fragmented, often inaccurate picture. In my opinion, beside the information they had from the lists of the kings of Israel and the calculation they made about the synchronisms with the kings of Judah, they also had a little information from a few other sources, mainly about the kings who reigned in Judah during the time period corresponding to the reign of the Omride kings. In addition, the biblical historiographers used the stories of prophets that they already had as written traditions, amongst which the stories of Elijah and Elisha stand out. These prophetic stories became the main core source for the history of the Omrides, and especially for the description of the days of Ahab's reign. This is the case despite their shortcomings. These stories are not related to the history of the kingdoms and their kings, but rather focus on the prophets and their exploits. The prophets were usually presented as opposition to the kings, who were portrayed extremely negatively in these stories. and the Deuteronomistic historiography had a difficult time dating some of these stories, as the historical context do not always emerge from them in an obvious way. The kings are not always mentioned by name, and the time and place are not always clear. The result is a distorted historical picture, which focuses on matters of religion and morality. It doesn't express the greatness and power of the Omride kings or the story of the kingdom of Israel during that period. Nor does it cover the Omride's relations with Israel's neighboring kingdom to the west, the Phoenicians, to the north, the Aramaic kingdoms, and especially Aram Damascus, to the east, mainly the kingdom of Moab, and to the south, which is the kingdom of Judah. Indeed, it was difficult for the historiographers to place the information they had from these prophetic sources in the correct historical location. Analysis of the Assyrian sources and the archaeological findings suggest that in some cases they made mistakes in placing these prophetic traditions and in connecting them to the correct king of Israel. Another important point to remember is that the negative description of the Omrides, which stems from the prophetic stories and has penetrated into the biblical historiography, despite the great success and prosperity that existed in their time, might also relate to the era in which some of these stories were written, most likely during the reign of the kings from the house of Yehu, and the desire to legitimize the dynasty of kings that had obliterated and replaced the Omride dynasty. We might interpret in this light some of the stories of Elijah's story cycle, including mainly the prophecy linked to Naboth the Israelites. The emphasis in this prophecy on the ending of the dynasty, in the manner common within the Deuteronomistic historiography and repeated regarding the end of other dynasties, is intended to serve as background for its elimination. Notable in this context are the various and contradictory testimonies, as well as the lack of uniformity in the biblical text at the end of the first book of Kings, chapter 21, where the famous accusation of Ahab in verse 19, "Have you killed and also taken possession?" is followed by the prophecy to Ahab in verses 19 to 22, according to which, "In the place where dogs licked up the blood of Naboth, shall dogs lick your own blood. I will utterly sweep you away and will cut off from Ahab every male, bond or free, in Israel. And I will make your house like the house of Jeroboam the son of Nebat, and like the house of Baasha the son of Achiah, for the anger to which you have provoked me, and because you have made Israel to sin." This also followed by the prophecy to Jezebel in verse 23-24. "And to Jezebel Yahweh also said, the dogs shall eat Jezebel within the bounds of Jezreel. Anyone belonging to Ahab who dies in the city, the dogs shall eat, and anyone of his who dies in the open country, the birds of the air shall eat." Continuing this, Ahab's repentance and the divine decision to postpone the ending of the dynasty to the days of his son's reign are described, and this is in verse 27 to 29. "And when Ahab heard those words, he rent his clothes and put sackcloth upon his flesh, and fasted and lay in sackcloth, and went about dejectedly. And the word of Yahweh came to Elijah the Tishbite, saying, Have you seen how Ahab has humbled himself before me? Because he has humbled himself before me, I will not bring the evil in his days, but in his son's days. I will bring the evil upon his house. The description of the important role of Elijah played during Yehu's anointment on the eve of his rebellion against the Omrides and the elimination of the royal house in accordance with Elijah's prophecy is part of the trend of legitimization of the house of Yehu. That is, the history here is largely subject to the ideology of the time of the composition of the prophetic stories, which dictated to a large extent the Deuteronomistic description that was written in Judah much later. Regarding the biblical descriptions of the days of the Omride's reign, it seems to me that the Untold story was mainly a matter of what the historiographers didn't know. Clearly, what they knew, they told in a way that matched their ideology. This story fit in with the larger story, with its general relationship to the kingdom of Israel and with the perceptions that prevailed in Judah over 200 years after the Omri dynasty was eliminated through the coup d'etat whose result remained engraved in memory, mainly due to what happened to the house of David and the kingdom of Judah in the aftermath, a topic we will discuss in the next chapter. But let's start at the beginning. An abundance of archaeological studies conducted in recent decades testify to a very long process of growth of territorial kingdoms in the Levant between the end of the 11th and the 9th century BCE. This process began in the region of nowadays northern Syria and eastern Turkey and slowly continued to advance southward over 200 years. All this happened during an intermediate period in which no large and powerful empires existed in the area, since after hundreds of years of undisputed rule, the Egyptians withdrew from the region. Assyria had not yet established itself or its power and controlled only over the nuclear Assyrian territories along the Tigris River, far from the areas beyond the Euphrates River. Throughout the Levant, local forces had a one-time opportunity to consolidate and develop. This is the stage at which city-states transitioned into territorial kingdom whose development process is slow, complex, and dependent on social and environmental factors. Usually, the process of growth of territorial kingdom began with local leadership, starting to accumulate wealth and to attain ever-increasing ruling powers in their own city-state as their power spread from that city to peripheral centers located around it. Within this territory, political and social boundaries took form, an economy with centralized characteristics developed, which includes agricultural and specialized industry as well as regional commerce, and an administration solidified itself, including a bureaucratic system, side by side with the development of an army, governing centers and fortresses, together with tax collection system and later even a local script, local culture, and unique local religious and cult. As mentioned, these processes in the Levant spanned over 200 years, from the end of the 11th century to the 9th century BCE. These gradual processes began in the kingdom of present-day northern Syria and eastern Turkey, towards the end of which is the kingdom of Israel, and continued from there to the peripheral kingdoms to the south and east, Judah, Ammon, Moab, and Edom. Everything changed for these kingdoms with the rise of the Assyrian Empire in the first half of the 9th century BCE during the reigns of Ashur-natsir-pal II. He ruled between 883 and 859 BCE, and especially in the time of Shalmaneser III, who ruled between 858 and 824 BCE, when the kingdom along the Euphrates and in the northern Syria faced the main threat of the rising Assyrian power. The Assyrian expansion into central Syria and towards the land of Israel was held off at this stage, largely thanks to the actions of the Omride kings. However, about a century later, the Assyrian Empire, led by Tiglath-Pileser III and his successors, destroyed the entire area of territorial kingdoms that arose in the region of Syria and the land of Israel, and thus ended a short interim period in which these kingdoms arose, prospered, and disappeared from history. This is the same process that also the kingdom of Israel went through, where the Omri dynasty was established as the first independent, most stable, largest, and most powerful dynasty in the regions of Samaria, the northern valleys in the Galilee, the northern coastal area, and the northern part of Transjordan. Yet, although Omri was such an important king and the founder of the first stable dynasty in Israel, apart from the information about his war with Zimri and Tibni and his ascension to the throne, a topic with which the previous chapter was ended, the description in the book of Kings devoted to his rule, to him, only 6 verses from 1 Kings 16 to verses 23 to 28. Of these verses, 3 comprise an extended opening formula, verses 23 and then 25 and 6, which is immediately followed by 2 verses in the format of a usual closing formula, verses 27 and 28. The opening formula includes 2 verses offering a harsh negative theological assessment according to which, I'm quoting, Omri did what was evil in the sight of Yahweh, and did more evil than all who were before him. For he walked in all the way of Jeroboam the son of Nebat, and in the sins which he made Israel to sin, provoking Yahweh the God of Israel to anger by their idols. Undoubtedly, this negative judgment of Omri stems from the historiographer's knowledge of the intrusion of Baal worship into Israel, as described later on in the days of Ahab, mainly as a result of the tightening of ties between Israel and Tyre, which were expressed, among other things, in Ahab's marriage to Jezebel, the daughter of Etbaal, king of the Sidonians, as described in first book of Kings, chapter 16, verse 31. This marriage, as we will see below, took place during the reign of Omri, the father of Ahab. The only piece of historical information given to the opening formula involves the dates of Omri's reign, which apparently originates from the list of kings on which the historiographers based their work and on the basis of which they calculated the synchronisms with the kings of Judah. And this is in verse 23. In the 31st year of Asa, king of Judah, Omri began to reign over Israel and reigned for 12 years. 6 years he reigned in Tirzah. The 2 pieces of historical information given in the closing formula likely also derive from the same list, according to which, in verse 28, Omri was buried in Samaria and his son Ahab ascended to the throne after him. I'm quoting, so Omri slept with his fathers and was buried in Samaria, and Ahab, his son, reigned in his stead. The only verse inserted into the opening formula that includes new, different, and seemingly reliable historical information describes the purchase of the hill of Samaria and the building of the city named after the previous owner of the land. And I'm quoting from verse 24. He bought the hill of Samaria from Shemer from 2 talents of silver. And he fortified the hill and called the name of the city which he built Samaria, Shomron, after the name of Shemer, the owner of the hill. The purchase of the hill of Samaria from Shemer for 2 talents of silver can be, of course, compared to Abraham's purchase of the cave of Machpelah for 400 shekel of silver. This is in Genesis 23. The purchase of the plot of land in Shechem from the sons of Hamor, the father of Shechem, for 100 pieces of money, kshita. This is in Genesis 33, verse 18. And of course, the purchase of the threshing floor from Araunah the Jebusite in Jerusalem for 50 shekels of silver, and this is according to 2 Samuel 24, verse 24. We have no information about the circumstances of the purchase of the hill. However, from the chronological sequence of the opening verse, it appears that the transfer of the capital from Tirzah to Samaria took place in the 7th year of Omri's reign, and if indeed 4 of the 6 first years of Omri's reign, including the civil war between Omri and Tibni, and the transfer occurred after the 7th day siege on Zimri and the burning of the palace there, we can assume that Tirzah was badly damaged in the long civil war. Perhaps this was the main reason for the king's decision to build a new capital that will be connected to his dynasty. Here too, the information about the king who founded a dynasty and a capital seem to have been well known, either because these things were recorded in the lists of kings or because such information was transmitted orally and was widely known and important to the inhabitants of the kingdom and possibly also to the inhabitants of the neighboring kingdoms. The story told about Omri, the king of Israel, is short and focused and does not express all the great power of the founder of this important dynasty and of its magnificent capital in the city of Samaria. However, various sources fill in some of the untold story about the days of Omri reign. So, for example, the opening lines to the Mesha Stele described Omri takeover of the entire northern region of Transjordan, that rich and important region north of the Arnon River, Wadi Mujib, called also in the Mesha Stele the land of Madaba, where the territory of the tribes of Gad and Reuben is located, who are listed in the Hebrew Bible among the 12 tribes of Israel. At least one of these tribes, the tribe of Gad, is referred to in the Mesha Stele as a local tribe in Transjordan, whose territory was conquered during the reign of Omri, the king of Israel. If so, then, the tribe of Gad couldn't have been part of the kingdom of Israel and the tribes of Israel before the conquest of the area by Omri. One wonders what fate befell the tribe of Gad after this area was freed from the Israelite occupation by Mesha, the king of Moab, and became a Moabite territory. There are words of Mesha as written in the Mesha Stele. He's saying, Omri, king of Israel, oppressed Moab for a long time because Kmosh was angry with his land. His son succeeded him, and he also said, I will also oppress Moab. It was during my days that he said thus, but I saw his downfall and the downfall of his house. Israel had been defeated, has been defeated forever. Omri had taken possession of the whole land of Madaba, and he dwelt in it during his days and during half days of his son, 40 years. But Kmosh restored it during my day, said Mesha. We can add to the information that emerges from the Mesha Stele the fact that Omri was the first among the kings of Israel for whose time there is no mention of wars between Israel and Judah in the biblical description evidence that apparently the strengthening and consolidation of the kingdom of Israel also included a process of reapproachment between the two kingdoms. This process continued throughout the existence of the Omride dynasty. Given this reality and the tightening of the connection between the two kingdoms, and also with the kingdom of Tyre, we can conclude that Omri was a strong and active king who paved the way and outlined policy for the kings who reigned after him. This is also how his kingship was perceived by other kingdoms in the region, since the Assyrian Empire, the king of Israel, was known as the House of Omri. Such naming is typical for the Assyrians in this period, who used to call the kingdoms after the founder of the dynasty they knew. Thus, for example, the kingdom of Aram Damascus was called the House of Hazael in the Assyrian inscriptions. On the other hand, in the biblical historiography, the dynasty was called the House of Ahab. And this is because of the prominent role this king had in the descriptions of the history of Israel during this period, further evidence of the ideological bias in the biblical descriptions of the history of the kingdom of Israel. From the data mentioned above, and additional information to be discussed in a minute, Ahab was beyond doubt one of the greatest kings who reigned in Israel. Despite this, and perhaps because of this, the biblical historiographer composed an extended opening formula about him. And I can read from the first book of Kings, chapter 16, verses 29 to 33. The first verse is usual, and the details seem to have been taken from the kings' lists, similar to the introductions to all the other kings of Israel, including the calculation of the synchronism with the kings of Judah. I'm quoting: in the 38th year of Asa, king of Judah, Ahab the son of Omri began to reign over Israel. And Ahab the son of Omri reigned over Israel in Samaria 22 years. It is followed by a theological evaluation formula that was expanded to comprise 3 verses in which Ahab is defined as the greatest of the sinful kings. I'm quoting: and Ahab the son of Omri did evil in the sight of Yahweh more than all that were before him. And as if it had been a light thing for him to walk in the sins of Jeroboam the son of Nebat, he took for wife Jezebel, the daughter of Baal, king of the Sidonians, and went and served Baal and worshipped him. He erected an altar for Baal in the house of Baal, which he built in Samaria. And Ahab made an Asherah. Ahab did more to provoke Yahweh, the God of Israel, to anger than all the kings of Israel who were before him. The closing formula about Ahab in chapter 22, verses 39 to 40 is normal. And a comment was added about the construction of the ivory house, apparently a palace with ivory inlaid furniture, of the type found in the excavations of the city of Samaria, and about the cities he built. I'm quoting: now, the rest of the acts of Ahab and all that he did, and the ivory house which he built, and all the cities that he built, are they not written in the book of the Chronicles of the kings of Israel? So Ahab slept with his fathers, and Ahaziah his son reigned in his stead. Between the opening formula and the closing formula for the reign of Ahab are the prophetic stories of the prophet Elijah. This is in first book of Kings, chapter 17 to 22, which focus on the cultic and social sins of Ahab, who is described in these stories as a sinful king, cruel to his people, weak in his character, and incompetent. None of these stories offer a single expression of Ahab's political and economic success. It seems that everything that the Deuteronomistic historiographer knew about Ahab stemmed from these prophetic stories, which center the prophet Elijah. Ahab remains marginal to them, but his character was shaped through these stories in the absence of any detail from another source. These stories relate their marriage to Ahab to Israel, an expression of the close ties that existed between Israel and Tyre, and the cultural and religious influence of Tyre in Israel at the time. Jezebel is presented as a decisive and accomplished woman. Her status as the daughter of the king of Tyre, and perhaps also the daughter of a priest who reigned in Tyre, explain well her cultural background, as under her patronage and support, Tyrian cult was introduced in Israel. According to the first book of Kings, chapter 16, verses 31 to 33, due to his marriage to Jezebel, Ahab also began to worship Baal, and I'm quoting, and went and served Baal and worshipped him. Moreover, he erected an altar for the Baal in the house of Baal, which he built in Samaria. This implies that a Phoenician deity had penetrated the kingdom of Israel, with evidence, at least from the Deuteronomistic historiographer's point of view, of the existence of local cult practice. According to chapter 16, verse 33, Ahab made an Asherah, when in second book of Kings, chapter 3, verse 2, it is said about Jehoram, son of Ahab, that he put away the pillar of Baal which his father has made. The evidence for the worship of Baal in Israel is very central in the stories of Elijah. Hence, for example, the story of Elijah's confrontation with the prophets of Baal on Mount Carmel in chapter 18, verse 19, and then 22, and then 40, mentions the 450 prophets of Baal and the 400 prophetess of Asherah who eat at Jezebel's table. The prophets of Baal and his priests are also mentioned in the story of Jehu's rebellion in 2nd Book of Kings chapter 10. Another issue that emerges from the Untold story regarding the days of Ahab is a relationship forged under his leadership with the kingdom of Judah. After all, until the days of the Omri dynasty, the kingdoms of Israel and Judah had fought with each other. Apparently, during the days of Ahab, Israel became such a strong and developed kingdom that not only did the house of David recognize the legitimacy of the ruling dynasty in the north, but it also came under its protection either voluntarily or reluctantly. There are several manifestations of this, the first of which is the marriage of Athaliah, the daughter of the king of Israel, to Joram, the son of Jehoshaphat, the king of Judah. Already in the opening formula about the days of his reign in the second book of Kings, chapter 8, verse 18, it is said of him that he walked in the way of the kings of Israel, as the house of Ahab had done, for the daughter of Ahab was his wife, and he did what was evil in the sight of Yahweh. This marriage followed the alliance that had existed between Israel and Judah already at the time of the war of Ahab and Jehoshaphat against Aram, as described in the first book of Kings chapter 22, when the king of Judah declared in verse 4, I am as you are, my people as your people, my horses as your horses. A similar statement was made by Jehoshaphat, king of Judah, who, following the request of Joram, king of Israel, to go with him to the war in Moab, he declared in the second book of Kings, chapter 3, verse 7, I will go. I am as you are, my people as yours people, my horses as your horses. Joram of Israel's connection with Ahaziah of Judah was so close that it was practically, if not functionally, familial. According to the second book of Kings, chapter 8, verses 28 to 29, not only did they go to war together, but after Joram was wounded in the war, a sick visit is described. And Ahaziah, the son of Joram, king of Judah, went down to see Joram, the son of Ahab, in Jezreel because he was sick. This can also be compared to the description in chapter 9, verses 16 and 21. Ahab's greatness seemed to be revealed in the central place he had in the anti-Assyrian regional alliance about which the Deuteronomistic historiographers knew nothing. After all, at the beginning of the 9th century BCE, after 200 years without the presence of any major power in the entire area between the Nile and the Euphrates, Ashur-Natsir-pal II, who ruled, as said, between 883 and 859, exactly in the time of Ahab, he began to attack the kingdoms west of the Euphrates. Assyria developed a mighty army with sophisticated fighting techniques, both in the open field and in the siege of fortified cities. And when King Shalmaneser III came to power, he began a series of attacks into northern Syria. In 853 BCE, he stood in the city of Karkar against an alliance of kings known as the Southern Alliance, and which was headed by Hadadezer, king of Aram Damascus, Irchulani, king of Hamat, and Ahab the Israelite, who according to the inscription led of the army of 2,000 chariots and 10,000 soldiers. Clearly, although Ahab was still far from the battlefield and the Assyrian danger, he was wise enough to take part in an alliance designed to stop the Assyrian army, because he understood that if the northern kingdoms were defeated, he would quickly find himself countering the Assyrian alone without the powerful kingdoms in Syria. Notably, there is no record in the Hebrew Bible of this battle. It's kind of a world war without any mention in the Bible, apparently because Judah didn't take part in it, and therefore the historiographer lacked information about it. Moreover, Ahab's participation in the 12th king alliance with Hadadezer, king of Aram, against Assyria entirely contradicts the prophetic stories in the first book of Kings, chapter 20 and 22, according to which a fierce rivalry prevailed in the days of Ahab between Israel and Aram Damascus. It seems that is no other alternative but to assume that an anonymous prophetic story was mistakenly inserted into these two chapters, which was not related to the days of Ahab and didn't mention the names of particular kings, but which the Deuteronomistic historiographers integrated into the description of the days of Ahab. We must assume that they even inserted the king's name in 3 places within the story, chapter 20, verses 2, 13, and 14, while in most part of the story the king's name is not mentioned and he is only referred to by his title, King of Israel. The picture is even more complicated in chapter 22, where Jehoshaphat, the king of Judah, is mentioned repeatedly, while Ahab is mentioned only once in verse 20, until the end of the chapter, where the death of Ahab in battle is mentioned in accordance with the prophecy given to him in chapter 21. Since according to chronological calculation, Ahab died in 853 BCE, the same year in which the Battle of Karkar was fought, many researchers assume that in chapter 22, a late story originating from Judah was inserted, and during its transmission, the Battle of Karkar against the Assyrians, which was unknown to the biblical authors, was replaced with the Battle of Ramoth Gilead against the Arameans, who was known to them. These descriptions reveal how little information the historiographers had about the days of the Omri dynasty and how hard they tried to tie together all the few sources they had in what they believed to be their right place, and to tell what they knew about this early period of time in the history of the kingdom of Israel. In places where they lacked historical anchors in the form of information about the events from the days of the kings of Judah, who reigned at the same time as the kings of Israel, they occasionally added this information and inserted around it other details they attained, mainly from prophetic sources. When these were not available to them either, the historiographers seem to have been in a complete historical fog about the history of the northern kingdom. In the next chapter, we will deal with what was told and what was left untold about Yehu's rebellion, the elimination of the Omri dynasty, and the ascension of the Nimshides to the monarchy in Israel. Examining these topics will help illustrate how problematic the prophetic stories are as historical source, and how limited the ability of the Deuteronomistic historiographers was in providing an established and reliable historical picture when almost all they had at their disposal were these prophetic sources. See you in the next chapter.